Very warm welcome to the new episode of Ink and Insights. This is your host Sumit Sharma Samir. This is a Nepal-based podcast, and if you are interested in listening to the thought leaders from around the world, please subscribe to my channel. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Sharon Moshavi in my program today. Sharon Moshavi is the president of the International Center for Journalists and the co-CEO of ICFJ Plus, a new global nonprofit co-founded with the civic tech powerhouse Code for Africa. ICFJ Plus exists to get actionable information into the hands of people working with journalists, technologists, and civil society to foster systemic solutions. Moshavi, who previously served as ICFJ's Senior Vice President of New Initiatives, has worked to advance journalism globally for nearly 2 decades now. Prior to ICFJ, she worked at the John S. and James L. Light Foundation. A former international correspondent, Moshavi was based in Jerusalem, New Delhi, and Tokyo, and has reported from more than a dozen countries. Sharon, welcome to Ink and Insights with Sumit Sharma Samir.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Sharon, from the front lines to the front office, what is the moment that made you realize your calling had shifted from reporting to the news to shaping the future of journalism itself?
Well, when I moved back to the U.S. after more than a decade overseas as a journalist, journalism was changing, and I wasn't as excited to go back to the sort of day to day. I really enjoyed reporting from overseas around the world, really sort of learning new things, new cultures, new people, and I was frankly not really excited to at the opportunities that were available in the US. So I was very fortunate to get a job working at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which is the largest journalism foundation in the US. And they were really looking at, as I like to say, journalism from 30,000 feet. How is it changing? How is it evolving? How does it need to change? How does it need to evolve? And so that was the first piece that really drove me. The second piece was when I had the opportunity to go work at the International Center for Journalists. And the president at that time was actually my former editor when I wrote for Business Week, based out of New Delhi. And what I really liked was the opportunity to support all these local journalists around the world, because these were the people that had enabled me to do my job for a decade from the 3 countries that I worked in, and many other countries. That to me was really, really enticing.
Right. And you have reported from different countries. What are the main stories that still lingers with you today, that still captures your imagination whenever you think about your the career in the past?
It's really the small things that stay with me. And I think the story that always stays with me, because it's really why I wanted to join ICFJ, is the very first story when I was in India, the first story that I left New Delhi to report on was in Goa. And traveling to Goa as is not exactly a hardship. And I was going to report on DuPont was building a factory there in the lush hills of Goa, and arsonists had burned down the factory. So I was going to investigate who was behind the factory. And a local journalist took me under his wing, introduced me to everybody from the chief minister to the shady groups who were likely behind this. And we drove around the hills of Goa, and I was on the back of his motorcycle. And that I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing that I am getting paid to do this.
Right. And, what was the most unexpected lesson you learned while covering North Korea's nuclear ambitions or Hamas in Gaza?
Those are very different stories, obviously, but I think the common denominator is these are groups that are considered, countries and groups that are considered and are very much bad actors, untrustworthy actors, dangerous actors. But I think covering both of those, you really sort of need to dig beyond just that sort of that facade, that two-dimensional representation. And I think that's where journalism is very important, is trying to sort of dig deeper, not to defend anything or to offer excuses for behavior, but we really do need to understand and not caricature different groups and different people.
Right, right. And certainly you have seen journalism evolve across continents in the last few decades. If you were starting your career today, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's a great question. What would I do differently? I would basically learn. I would be on technology first. I would be learning and understanding how forensic analysis works, how data works, how disinformation works. I would be really, I think I would approach journalism more as a researcher than as I'm just, interviewing people. Because when I was, it's still incredibly important to interview people and human beings, but there is so much access to information and data. We need to be exploring that and figuring out how do we do that better and more effectively to really understand what is happening.
Absolutely. And at ICFJ, you are helping journalists navigate a rapidly changing media landscape. What's one innovation you think every newsroom should embrace right now?
I'll go back to what I call forensic analysis, and it really goes to uncovering disinformation. So much, I think, disinformation, as we know, is become a huge issue. We have an incredibly polluted information landscape. And I think journalists' ability to deal with this landscape is enormously, enormously important. So innovating, whether it's reaching audiences, how do we better effectively reach audiences in this environment and truly engage with them in completely different ways? That's one area. And the other area around disinformation is being able to understand where it's coming from. And it's not enough to do whack a mole, this here, this is not right, this is here, but there are often nodes of information. And how do we sort of identify, investigate those nodes, how they're amplified, and then how do we sort of then use that information to change the landscape and change the narrative?
Yeah, yeah. I think the most, important thing that needs to be done is like enhancing people with the skill to segregate the right kind of information at this point of time, given the amount of informations that we are provided every day, in fact.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So, Sarah, you're also a part of launching the Night New Challenge. What did that experience teach you about the intersection of journalism and technology?
That was incredibly illuminating. And it also shows you how much of the world has changed. So when that started, uh, it was the first sort of challenge. Philanthropy wasn't doing that kind of work. Nobody was doing that kind of work, which is come up with a great idea and we'll give you some money. And that was a whole game changer. So just the concept of it was interesting. And we had to explain it to people. And so what that taught me is journalists cannot live in silos. You cannot do, as I like to say, there's nothing worse than two journalists with a great idea, like to start a business or start a news site often, because they need other skill sets. And I think that goes to really every aspect of journalism. Journalists need to have a much broader range of skill sets than they ever needed to before, and they need to bringing in innovative ideas, technologists, but it's really thinking outside the box. Innovation, which is as we know, is an overused word, feels meaningless sometimes, but it is incredibly important to the future of journalism.
Yeah, yeah. The kind of skills and resources required are really demanding in the present context. But people and particularly journalists has to really work hard despite lagging all those things in today's context. So, what's the biggest misconception people have about journalism in under-resourced or repressive environments?
I think it's the same issue that frankly happens in every country. It happens probably more in repressive countries or under resourced where there's less trust in institutions, where you have the government sort of making attempts to discredit journalists. But the feeling, I think, the misconception is oftentimes people think journalists have an agenda, that they are coming into a story with a specific agenda. Either they know what the story is going to be, or they have their own personal agenda in it. And I think 90-95% of journalists will go where the truth leads them, and I think that is something we need to do a much better job of communicating to audiences and the public.
Right. And how do you personally define impact in journalism, and what is the way to measure it, Sharon?
That is a really tough thing. My organization, we spend a lot of time looking at that and thinking about it. And I think that's one of the challenges of journalism, impact, measuring that impact. So we do it in multiple ways. I think it is the reach. Who are you reaching? And not just the numbers, but the kinds of audiences. Are you expanding? Are you getting your news and information in front of audiences who may be underserved or maybe not necessarily open to they might not be in your political bent, shall we say. So things like that are incredibly important. And the other is, how much does it move public conversation? Are officials responding to it? Is there legislation that's coming out of it? Is there any of that sort of societal impact happening? So, but it's a very hard thing to measure. But what we do know is that what the absence of journalism looks like and the absence of facts looks like, that we have a very clear picture. We know that participation in democracies goes down when you don't have access to local media, to media that speaks to you. Your civic engagement goes down. So it's the impact of journalism in a way, sadly, can only be, not only, but the best way to measure it is, if it's gone, oh boy, you will feel it.
Right. And, with AI and automation entering the newsroom in today's context, what excites you most and what keeps you up at night?
So both. I mean, that's another thing. We could have a whole conversation about AI, but briefly, sort of what excites me is the workflow piece, is the doing more with less. Most newsrooms these days, with the exception of a few big global ones, most are under-resourced. Most newsrooms have very few people. The business model for journalism has really, really collapsed in most parts of the world. We can talk about that if you want as well, too, but that really has created a resource problem. And so AI has the potential to provide a lot of resources. It's not talking about getting rid of people's jobs. I mean, there's not going to be journalism jobs if we don't solve the business model and the resource issues. So it's a way to protect journalism, I think, very much so. On the negative side, what keeps me up at night is several things. One is the disinformation, right? You can do disinformation at scale, at warp speed with AI, and that is very challenging. The other is all of the AI training models are training on journalistic content. Most news organizations, there's a few big ones who have signed, deals with the AI companies to pay for their content, but most the content is being given away for free. And that's something that we're looking at. How can we change that? And the second problem with that is not just, oh, I'm giving it for free, but there's all these ancillary issues. There are issues now where websites are being crawled by so many AI bots that they're crashing. So now you have to pay more in order to, it's not a real audience. But basically you now have, your website costs just went up. And the other thing, which is probably a bigger thing, which is that a lot of news is found by search. And I'm sure anybody listening to this, and you've done it and I've done it, which is you search something, you're going to the AI summary. And so links are getting clicked on. So we've already seen news publishers, their traffic going down by 20 to 30%. So these are the things that from an AI perspective are really challenging. And there's more, but on both sides, but that's in summary.
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है, बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल, नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्त्य बिहे गर्दिनु।
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको, 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो। के भो? अचम्म छ। एक्सक्यूज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन?
गेट आउट।
हेलो,
के सोच्यौ त?
के सोच्ने? मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसके। 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ? के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा?
के भयो भाइ? ल बस। साउजी एक कप चिया। कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा केही हुँदैन भनेर? यो हेर, एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ।
ए हो र?
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना। एलआईसी नेपाल।
Warm services to delight your senses, taking hospitality to newer heights. Nepal Airlines.
Yeah, and yourself, Sharon, you serve on several boards and advisory groups. How do these roles inform your leadership at ICFJ?
It's a great question. So one board I'm on is something called the News Product Alliance, and that's really helpful. It's a great organization. They're focused very specifically on news product. And that news product is basically the intersection of business and editorial and audience. It's developing products, newsletters, is this sort of simplest product just for people to sort of understand. But that's a product, right? And or verticals, how are you sort of doing news in a way that is very audience centric? And I think that audience centric thing is hugely important. So that helps inform the work at ICFJ, because we're trying to get our huge number of journalists in our network to think about the audience. And that doesn't mean pandering. That doesn't mean not producing the news the way it needs to be done. But what it does mean is you need people to be consuming your news. How do you create that discovery of people getting access and get that repeat habit so they come back to you? So formats matter a lot in this social media, TikTok, newsletter age that we live in.
Yeah, yeah. And in that context, what's your advice to young journalists who want to make a difference but feel overwhelmed by the state of the industry right now?
That is a great question. I would say build up your skills in one. Don't try to do everything. I think that is where people get overwhelmed. But pick a topic that you can become a subject matter expert in. I think the days of the generalist too. I was a generalist, as I like to say, and most journalists have been. And as I like to say, we know a little about a lot of things. And I think understanding a few areas deeply, and then you can sort of use that as a riffing off point to then look at things, drill down in them more. And so I think that would be an incredibly useful thing for people to do. The second thing is build up your innovation skills, build up AI. That's the second piece. You've got to learn AI. You've got to understand it, understand what it can do, what it can't do, where the dangers are. I think that is absolutely crucial for the next generation of journalists.
Right. And Sharon, you have raised a Gen Z child while leading global media initiatives. And how has that shaped your view of the future of news consumption?
Oh, it's been great. I call her my one-child focus group. So for years, so she's 20, and so I interview her and her friends on a regular basis. And when she was very young, I saw the necessity of media literacy. And so and then she had to take a media literacy school, and she was like, "Mom, I already know everything," because she knows before I say anything. She's like, "Yes, and here are my sources." So, so hopefully she's managed to impart that on her friends as well too. But it's been really educational and understanding where and how news consumption happens, because it happens. News consumption, we bemoan sort of the state of journalism, but news consumption is up hugely. The numbers visiting news websites is actually quite enormous. The trick is getting enough money, getting people to pay for the content or advertising to support it or sponsors or what have you. But so they're just consuming it in very different ways. And one of the things and I just actually spoke to a group of high school students in Michigan recently, and that was very illuminating. And I feel like I hear something similar from sort of all Gen Z, or I guess those guys are Gen Alpha, but they look for discovery in peer relationships, their friends, social media influencers, creators. This is where they sort of initially find out about things, but they're interested in diving deep into things. And when they do want to sort of do research, they do go to media organizations, journalists. There is still that trust. It's not the first place they go. And I think that's something we need to contend with and think about. How do we operate then and work with an information ecosystem that operates this way? We can't just sort of hold up our hands and complain. We need to actually do something about it.
Right. And when you think about the future of journalism, what gives you the most hope?
What gives me the most hope is that there are people trying to do things so differently. There are people who really are committed to a better news landscape, a better information ecosystem where we do want the facts, we do want to understand, and people are trying new things, and I think that's incredibly important. And I think that's another key. One thing I love about the work that we do through ICFJ, and now will happen through ICFJ Plus, is providing the room and the resources and the peers from different disciplines to experiment. We need to experiment and try new things. If we don't do that, and I do see a number of people who really want to try to figure out, to build a better mousetrap, if you will.
Right, right. And if you could write a letter to your younger self, the one just starting out as a foreign correspondent, what would it say?
Oh my God, that's a great question. What would it say? It would say, this is not about you. This is not about any personal grandeur. It's not about the byline. It is about giving voice to people. Put your ego aside and remember why you're here. You're here to tell other people's stories.
Right, right. Absolutely. Profound message, in fact. Sharon, I'm sure that you must have been, influenced by a lot many things in life, but is there any book, film, or piece of journalism that has profoundly shaped your worldview?
That's a good question. I have a fondness for journalism movies, as many journalists do. And I'm not sure it's if it's shaped my worldview or not, but there is a comedy from the 90s called The Paper, and it's about a tabloid in New York City. And there is something, it reminds me why I did want to go into journalism. And I lived in New York in the 90s. And so it speaks to me from that time and era. And I never ended up working at the Daily News or the Post, but I did interview for a job at the Daily News once. And the sheer anarchy and fun of it. And I think one thing to remember, and it shapes my worldview, is it is a privilege to be a journalist. It is a privilege to be in other people's worlds. It is a privilege to have a lifestyle that is frankly a bit more flexible and is not about it is not a 9 to 5 drudgery. Every day is different. And that something about that movie, I wouldn't say it's a profound movie, but it speaks to a time and a place and an ethos that grounds me.
Right, right. Very interesting. And Sharon, just for fun, what's your ultimate go-to snack during a long strategy session? Still sunflower seeds, or has something else taken the place?
I love sunflower seeds, but man, those are. I have a salty tooth, not a sweet tooth. Sunflowers, yes, or popcorn. Those are the two. It's got to be a salt fix, but sunflowers will still win the day every day.
Right, right. Sharon, perhaps my last question for today's program. What's one legacy you hope to leave behind, not just as a leader, but as someone who's spent a lifetime championing truth and storytelling?
It's a really good question. I think the legacy I would like to leave behind is that reality does matter. Like there is, I really do want to, I know there are different perspectives and we all live our truth, but I still do believe there is, maybe not a truth, but a fact is a fact. And there's a former, he's passed now, a senator in the US back in the day named Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And he once said, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And I would love to help restore that. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and there is no such thing as absolute and ultimate truth. But a phone is a phone. My AirPods are AirPods. I would like to get us there, and I would like to be remembered as somebody who tried to push people to think outside the box when it comes to journalism. That we cannot trade in what we've always done, and we need to be willing to think differently. And I think that is, and only then are we going to get to that world I like where, facts reign.
Sharon, on that note, everyone is entitled to their opinion. On that note, I would like to end today's program, but I'm really honored that you decided or agreed to be a part of my platform. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.